Hey guys, welcome back to the show. I'm Parker Emerald, and this is the Conversation Station. Today's guest is a health and wellness coach, writer, and mother of three. She is passionate about nutrition, wellness, and holistic health, and she helps others achieve their health goals through energetic healing, life coaching, and health coaching. She's also the wife of Dr. Joseph Ladapo, Florida's new Surgeon General who advocates for individual choice and responsibility in public health policies. Brianna has a background in communications and has worked as the Director of Communications at NYU School of Medicine. She's a proponent of healthy living through good choices and individual responsibility. So without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to the one and only Brianna Ladapo. Welcome on.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited for this one. I know I didn't mention it in the intro, but I also know that you have a book. And you're doing all these awesome things. So why don't you just start off by giving the audience a bit of an idea of what your journey has been like, and how you came to be doing what you're doing, and what was it, what has this journey of life looked like for you?
Sure. So my book is called Emerging from Darkness, and the first half of it is essentially my story. And it is a long one, but the briefest way I can put it is I grew up in a family that was extremely religious. My mother's side was fundamentalist Protestant, and my dad's side was fundamentalist Catholic. Very, very dogmatic to the extent that they believed, both sides believed the other side was going to hell. So in a way, I was born into a religious war on a very small scale. But the problem with that for me is that I was a child who was born having visions, hearing angels, being able to see into the future. And as a kid, you define the world through your own experience. So I had no idea this was strange. And I talked quite openly about it with my very religious family. And that led them to determine that I must be satanic and evil. And as you can imagine, for a child, that's very disruptive. It's very hurtful, and it's very traumatic. So in a nutshell, I went on a quest to make myself smaller, more acceptable, less objectionable to my family. And in doing so, I put out my own light, and I caused myself a lot of pain. I was in a very dark place for many years, lots and lots of abuse, particularly sexual abuse. And as I think for most people who experience something like that, it led me to an extremely dark place. And again, this is a long story. It would take many hours to do it justice. But in a nutshell, I started to have experiences once I got away from my family that were clearly, in retrospect, trying to shake me out of it, out of my stupor, this reverie that I had created to keep myself safe. And one of those experiences, actually, all of these I detail in my book, but one of those experiences was meeting the man who's now my husband, Joe. And another one of those was going to Egypt in grad school with a professor of mine. And I had some extraordinary experiences there. And some of them were of what I thought were dreams. I had as a child recurring dreams that turned out to be visions, but I didn't realize it until I went to Egypt and found myself standing in the very places that I was seeing my whole life. And there were dreams, I literally had them every night for 30 years. And I just didn't know what it was until I got there. So in any case, my husband also had quite a bit of trauma himself. And he wouldn't mind my sharing this because he also has spoken at length about it and has a book about his experience. But what happened, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, when you're in a relationship, especially a very intense relationship, you tend to act as a mirror for your partner. And so no matter how much you love each other, your respective trauma comes to the surface and demands to be dealt with. And this led us to a very, very dark place in our relationship. It was almost the end of it. And one day I had a complete breakdown to a friend of mine because I didn't know what to do. We had tried traditional therapy and self-help things like Landmark and Avatar and studying every world religion we could get our hands on, but nothing worked. And I think a lot of people find themselves in this situation. So eventually, this friend of mine said, I have someone I think you should meet. He's a little bit out there, but get his book and see what you think. So I ordered his book, and I didn't even need to open it because his picture was on the cover. And I had such an incredibly deep soul resonance with this man that I knew he was going to be able to help. And that might sound unusual to some people, but if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you always trust your intuition. In any case, my husband and I both went to see this man, and we had a beyond extraordinary experience. But the bottom line is that he taught us how to transmute trauma. And for anyone for whom a transmutation is a new idea, it literally just means changing energy. So energy is permanent, right? It's everlasting. You can never get rid of it, but you can change it from something low vibrational that doesn't serve you into something high vibrational that does. It puts you on your correct path for you and all others. And in going through this process and learning how to literally remove trauma from our bodies, it allowed us to actually step into who we really are and create the lives that we actually wanted. I guarantee you, neither one of us would be published. We would not have the jobs we have. We would not do the things we do if we had not managed to get rid of the trauma that was creating the personalities that we thought were ours, but were really causing us to interact with the world in a very specific way. I'd be happy to tell you more, but
yeah, I mean, I think
if you have questions.
I think that just talking about that, and it is one of those very interesting things, like as you were talking about just the early days around your parents and these fundamentalist arena and sort of religion, it kind of, one of the things I always like to bring it back to is, and it's something that's said a lot by every guru ever. It's pretty cliche, but it's you are who you surround yourself with. And I think that it's so very evident when we look upon the mistakes we've made. Oftentimes, the biggest mistakes we make are surrounding ourselves with the wrong people, being in an environment that doesn't serve us. And it's interesting that you brought up, taking the energy that is trauma and turning it into, as you put it, high vibration energy. And it's interesting because I just did a podcast episode yesterday where I was talking about taking ownership of your mind. And I did another episode that was talking about how the only common denominator when it comes to your problems is you. And there's obviously external factors, but the only way to get to get over these things is you have to learn how to make the choice. Mm-hmm. Because it is a choice whether you feel a certain way or not. But the hardest thing to do is to learn how to choose to be happy. Yes. And for a lot of people, it seems like an impossibility because not only do we have our own experiences, right? Our own lifetime's worth of trauma. We also come in with many generations of ancestral or intergenerational trauma. And that's a very real thing. And a lot of people think that is mad science or something, but it's actually epigenetics. It's quite real. So just for example, in my case, I come from a very long line of women who have been sexually abused. So it was almost inevitable that I repeat that pattern because until you have some sort of pattern interrupt or someone who's willing to do the work to disrupt that repetition, it's going to keep on going forward into every subsequent generation. My husband has a similar story. And of course, every family, every group of people, every child has their own version of this. And I love what you said about choice because it does come down to choice. And the most valuable thing I've ever learned, though I didn't take it well at first, is that every single thing we ever experience in our lives is a co-creation. And that is a very affronting thing to say to someone who's been through horrific experiences, right? Or maybe anyone at all, because immediately you want to think, wait a minute. No, that happened to me, right? That was done to me. But the reality is, and this is not conscious, I'm not suggesting that we consciously choose trauma, but subconsciously, you're a slave to your vibration. And so whatever stress patterns you picked up from the people who raised you, whatever experiences you've had subsequently in this life, they inform every interaction you ever have. And until we realize that we are at least 50% responsible for everything we go through, it's very difficult to change it. So it's a scary thought to realize that you've had something to do with your life, but it's also incredibly empowering because if you can create it, you can discreate it. Or if you don't like it, you can create something new, something that really serves you. Yeah, and I think one of the best ways to sort of think about this is think about the person that in your life who is the Debbie Downer who can never catch a break, right? The person that can never catch a break never seems to catch a break. But that same person, if the same thing if they just shifted their mindset, right? And I like this idea of taking it from a bad thing, and it's literally one word, just shift it to good, because there is a good in every bad thing that happens to you. Even something objectively terrible, you learn something about yourself. And in all of these situations, there's always a positive. It is hard to find that positive sometimes, but it's always there. And if you can shift your mindset to see the positive in the problem, and more so than that, see the solution, not the problem. Because at the end of the day, seeing the solution is going to be infinitely more valuable than seeing that problem. And so I think that when that mindset shift happens, it is a hard thing to realize. But once you realize it, that is when you can truly take control of your life, because you understand that every action is a choice. And I think one of the biggest stepping stones is to understand that it's a choice when it comes to losing your temper, because that's a thing a lot of people struggle with. But far more often than not, it's a grasp for control, because they don't feel they have control in all these other arenas. But when you realize that grasping for that control isn't strength, it's far more weakness, you can start to shift and be, when you feel that anger onsetting, you can make the choice and just not. And I know that sounds kind of ridiculous when you say just don't, but a lot of the time it's the same. But the other mistake people make is sweeping the things that frustrate them under the rug. There's a difference between having emotional discipline and not going off on someone in the moment and never bringing it up again. You should bring up the things that are hurting you internally, but just don't bring it up when you're full of emotion.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. For so many reasons. The last chapter of my book is actually a thorough and lengthy breakdown of steps that anyone, regardless of age, experience, training, whatnot, can take immediately to raise their vibration and change their experience. And one of those subchapters is about focus. So you're absolutely right. It is about training your consciousness, because in any given situation, like you said, you can choose where your focus is. And it's not that the choice is ever right or wrong. It's just going to provide you with a different experience. So you're choosing, bless you, whether you want to have a positive experience and create more, it depends on the situation, but let's say joy, connectivity, depth in your life, or whether you want to create more negativity in your life. And I love what you said as well about, now I have to sneeze. Excuse me. Oh, goodness, where was I? You can cut this out, right?
Yeah.
Good. Oh, I was going somewhere with this.
You were saying you liked something else I said.
Yeah, you were saying something about, oh goodness, whatever it was reminding me of, we have a culture these days that is not encouraging people to have difficult conversations. It's encouraging people, if it makes you uncomfortable, to run away, close your eyes, disconnect from that person or that topic. And unfortunately, it's creating a society that can't communicate with one another. And as a result of that, we're not learning from each other anymore, because we're telling people, oh, well, if you don't like that, you can just ignore it, pretend it doesn't exist. Unfortunately, that's completely unsustainable. And it also plays into our own desire to be comfortable all the time, right?
Yeah. And I think what you were referring to is when I was talking about don't sweep it under the rug. Don't go after it when you're full of emotion, but still address it, you know?
Well, and also, when you have an emotional response to something, it's an invitation to look closer, right? That's an invitation to look deeper at where you might need healing, or however you want to characterize it, a little bit more self-reflection. And it's not wrong. We also have a culture that tells us, especially with social media, that we have to be perfect, we have to look perfect, we can't struggle, that other people, their lives seem so wonderful, when none of this is true. And the most powerful thing we can actually do is be completely honest with each other. Because when you talk about a struggle you've had and how you got through it, that gives someone else permission to have the same experience, to be open, to talk about their struggle, and to start to get that off their soul. And a lot of people don't, because they're not even talking about it, they don't know that it is very possible to get to the other side of it and live a more wonderful life than you ever thought possible while in the midst of that suffering. It doesn't have to define you.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is suffering can masquerade as other things. Mm-hmm. In the way that your mind is equipped to take the easy road a lot of the time, because when we were, surviving out in the jungle, that was the smart thing to do a lot of the time, because the hard things we had to do, we just had to do them. There wasn't a choice. But these days we have so much choice. We have so much ease in our lives that it has shifted from being do the easy thing to choose the hard thing, right? And so our mind will trick us and tell us that when we are in these times of when we are hopeless, our mind can trick us into seeing the external factors as opposed to the internal factors. All right, we had some technical difficulties, but we're back now. I have no idea where we even were. I'm trying to remember.
I feel like we were talking about choice.
Yes.
And focus.
Yeah, and a lot of these things, and the fact that it is hard to process that these things are choices. But it is so interesting. One of the things I like to think about is I think that more than always, because the people that are always amped about life and the people that are always a Debbie Downer, those are a bit extremes. But we all have those times when we go on a roll for a day, a week, a month, where we just want to get out of bed the next day. We don't want the day to end. And so I think that mindset is what you are trying to achieve in your everyday life. But I also think we have to have the discipline to get things done when we don't feel like that, because that mindset stems from the idea of getting things done, because you're excited to get things done. But you have to, in order to achieve that excitement and on a daily basis, you have to get things done even when you're not excited.
Yes, that is true. Most of the people that I work with, actually all of them, are dealing with severe trauma. And I work with a lot of kids because I work in nonprofit, and I work with children who have been trafficked and sexually exploited. And so these, as you can imagine, these little ones have been through more hell than many people go through in, I think, multiple adult lifetimes. It's unimaginable. But the thing that's amazing about children is that they are so resilient, and they, no matter what has been done to them, they have so much love in their hearts that they really they want to feel well. They want everyone else to feel well. I'm constantly touched by how much these kids, regardless of what they've been through, they still care about each other. Oftentimes, they even still care about the people who traumatized them. And it's an amazing reminder to me of the human capacity for compassion and love. And I feel like that is something all adults could take a lesson from these children, myself included, particularly in our situation today. I know we've all been through a lot the past 3 years, but it's been disheartening at times to see people turn on each other over relatively insignificant details. There's been so much fighting over things like the mandates, mask or no mask, vaccine or no vaccine. And it's been interesting to see how comfortable people are, to speak to your earlier point about control, trying to make decisions for other people. And I do think that, like you said, it's really about trying to feel safe in their own lives, because they don't.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because we live in a culture today that gives us the opportunity online to only see content and only surround ourselves with people that agree with us on everything. Mm-hmm. And so it creates this situation where no one's challenging their own beliefs. And that is so important. you have to challenge your own beliefs in order to be able to accept them as fact. But we live in a world where no matter what you believe, no matter how you feel about any topic, any issue, it is a bad idea to surround yourself with people that only agree with you. You need to, but in that same vein, you can't just surround yourself with people that disagree with you and yell at them. You have to have the capacity to have a conversation. You have to have the understanding that other people's perspectives are just as valid as yours. And you might always disagree with this person. You might, you're never going to convince them that you are right, and they're never going to convince you that they're right. But you should still challenge them, and because it is important to create both a functioning mind and a mental fortitude as to what you believe to be true.
Absolutely. Yeah, I could not agree with you more. And I do feel like that is a skill that's being lost. Being able to have a conversation about something difficult or challenging or triggering with grace is a skill. And we are being actively discouraged from doing that. And unfortunately, not only is nobody learning anything, when we live in a society like that, where simply by embracing a certain set of beliefs, you're cutting yourself off from half the population or whatever it is, you're missing a critical opportunity for self-examination and self-growth as well.
Yeah, for sure. And it's one of those things that it just keeps getting worse and worse. But I think even, one thing I don't like hearing is people blaming the algorithm or algorithms. But algorithms are simply catering to what you watch and what you believe. So here's the thing. If you start watching some content that challenges your beliefs, algorithms as a whole, their job is to recommend you more of what you enjoy. So they are going to give you more of that. So it is up to you, right? And I see this, and I especially see it, but I do think that the algorithms do, to some degree, perpetuate this. So there are two sides to the coin. The people that think the algorithm is just perfect and right, they're wrong. But the people that think the algorithm is 100% wrong, they're wrong. It's 50-50. You create your own reality. But certainly having something that inherently caters to you isn't great. Because if we look back in time when we had only 3 channels, right? And a couple of newspapers, I don't believe that was a better time than today. But I also think that we need to understand that at that time, when you could only pick from a couple of different sources, and those sources had to cater to everyone, you would read one article that you agreed with, and the next article you would disagree with. And these days, you go on any sort of platform, and you only see, I agree with this, I agree with this. And out of every 10, you see one you disagree with, and you just exit out as quickly as possible and go on to the next thing you agree with.
Yeah. I actually have a chapter in my book about consumption of all things, of literally what you put into your body, but also what you put into your mind and into your soul. And you're absolutely right when you say you create your own experience. And what you take in, whether we're talking about toxic food and chemicals, unclean water, chemicals in the air, or whether we're talking about certain mainstream media, social media, even if it's media that you largely agree with. A lot of people have gone more alternative these days, looking for multiple sources, because the mainstream does come from, in general, a very limited number of perspectives. And even people who realize that and are going, who are deliberately taking steps to go outside of that perspective, it's still not necessarily a healthy thing, because all of this is noise, right? All of this creates interference that ultimately distracts you from hearing your own intuition. And what I would really like to see is people remember the fact that no one knows what is best for you except for you. You know everything you need to in terms of the direction of your own life. Your intuition is your guide. everyone needs to start listening to their gut. We'd all be better off if we listened to fewer experts on TV and started really checking in at a soul level and saying, what do I feel is actually right for me? And the other thing is, it's not going to be the same for everybody, right? We're fed this line like there is one reality, there is one truth, there is one correct path for all, when that's simply not true. There are as many paths as there are beings walking this planet right now.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing is when I had a guest on a couple days ago, and what he was talking about is, what do you want? What do you desire in life? Because something is in your head right now, but something your gut gave you. Like if you just wanna ride a motorbike around the country, then that's what popped into your head right now. But along with that, now all of these external voices are in your mind as well, telling you want to ride a motorbike, but you should go do this. You should go get an office job and make money, right? And you should do X, Y, Z. But the fact is, you're never going to be happy in that unless you are either fully or externally from your work doing what you want to do. And I think that, there are these external factors telling us what we should want, but you're never going to want what people tell you to want. Now, someone might mention wanting something, and it might trigger something inside of you, and you're like, yes, I do want that. But you need to make sure that that's actually what you want, so that you don't start living your life off of someone else's beliefs.
Yes. And even beyond that is the question of, what is motivating the sources that are telling you what you should want? And I feel like that's a question not enough people are asking. There's a little bit too much blind obedience going on and not enough questioning of the source. And that's not to say that those who are weighing in on what may or may not be best for you may have good or bad intentions. Who knows? There's a whole spectrum there that we could discuss. But it's very important to consider the source. And I very often run into people who are full of the shoulds, as I say. I should do this, and I should do that. I should become a doctor. I should go to graduate school. I should eat more greens, whatever it is. And regardless of the value of the suggestion, it really comes down to, does it resonate with your soul? And what is the motivation of the person making that suggestion?
Yeah, and I think the people that are the most inspiring, they're not the people telling you what to do. They're the people doing a thing really well, showing you how they're doing it. But then they are also the people that when you tell them you want to do this, they're like, okay, well, here's how I can help with what I do to get you to be able to do what you want to do. And I think that is the entire point of a mentor, right? When you decide you want to get a mentor in X area, you are not looking for someone to tell you, you're looking for someone to show you. And you're looking for someone that is both there to show you how they walk their walk, but who's also going to support you when you step onto a different path. And I think mentorship is something we've lost in today's society, where we have teachers, and teachers are only valuable to a certain level, because when you get to a point where you are truly ready to take action, you often need to talk to a person who's done the thing, as opposed to a person who's learned how to do the thing. And I'm not discrediting the value of an educator, because they are valuable. You do need education, but there are multiple different forms, and I think at the end of the day, the most important form of education is the person that is doing a thing, and that thing resonates with you, and then you get to go along with them on their journey to do the thing and learn how to do the thing yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm having this experience right now with my children. To bring it back to my earlier comment about considering the motivation behind the source. And I've had to pull my children out of school because I'm learning that, unfortunately, even within our educational system, there is very much an agenda, and it starts much earlier than I realized. So my kids are very young, And I didn't think, for example, when the lockdown happened and school shut down, I wasn't overly concerned about the curriculum of a preschooler and a first grader. I didn't think I needed to be. But when I decided to homeschool them, because I wasn't going to put them in front of a screen for 8 hours a day, because that seemed insane to me, I took a look at their curriculum. And even at those ages, it's already very clear that someone else's agenda is creeping in there. There's little bits of indoctrination and word problems. The vocabulary selections are odd, to say the least. And that was really illuminating for me because I had been relatively naive on that topic. But it turns out that there's always an agenda. And again, I'm not saying that's right or wrong or good or bad, but the awareness of that is critical to being able to make the decision of whether or not that's something that resonates with your path and your soul.
Yeah, and I think it's an issue that we run into today with schooling as a whole, because we are told that there is one path in schooling. And as you said earlier, there is no one path. That is a lie. And so when we are told there is one path, you go through this system, then you go off to college, and then you do this. But then when we look at there are so many people who are successful in business who dropped out of high school, right? And that's not the right path for everyone, but that's the right path for some. And so I think that the biggest issue with education is that it's a cookie cutter conveyor belt system. But I also don't think that that's by accident. That is in many ways by design. Because school is not made to create critical thinkers in a lot of ways. It is created to make employees. And I think the biggest thing is that for many parents and for many families across the country, the parents have become the lowest point of education, meaning they do the least amount of education in their kids' lives. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, the parents should be responsible for most of that education. And I think one of the big things that is that the parents as well have grown up in the system that you just send your kids to a school and they take care of it. But what it is easy to see is that can be very flawed. Now, the fact is that some parents, as we've explored, some parents aren't the best parents at the end of the day. That can be a problem, but that's why the education of a child starts with the parent. And that's a very interesting topic to think about, because that's not something we touch on much. But the education of a child starts with the parent. And so sometimes to do what's best for the child, you have to educate the parent.
That's a very tall order because you're right. We're coming out of several generations that thought nothing of sending their kids off to school for 8 hours a day to be taught by strangers. And, in some situations, that might be the most beneficial path, particularly if let's say there's violence at home and you have a child for whom getting out of that house every day and actually having a hot meal is the best possible option for the time. Now, I'm certainly hoping that is the exception and not the rule.
Yeah.
But it does happen. However, you're absolutely right. And I see this all the time where parents don't want to take any responsibility for what they're teaching their children. And the reality is, even if you're not actively choosing to teach your children, they're still learning from you. They're watching every single thing you do, from the way you speak to each other as the parents, from the way you interact with, say, a person at a grocery store or a restaurant. You are their teacher and you are their example. I ran into a situation recently where I was with my children and we were out in a group, and it was an innocuous enough activity, but the people in charge were asking us to conform to a certain set of beliefs and behaviors in order to participate. And though I think the experience itself would have been a blast for my kids, I chose to remove them from that situation. And I explained to them why, because I think it is very dangerous to be taught at a young age that you need somebody else to make your decisions for you, that you need someone else to do your thinking for you. Like you said earlier, we are not raising critical thinkers anymore. We have a system that is actively designed to produce followers. And I believe that's how we found ourselves in the situation we're in right now on a grand scale.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting what you said is educated by strangers. And the interesting thing is in order to educate your kids, they don't have to be educated by strangers. That's the truth. They don't have to be educated by you, but they don't have to be educated by strangers. In the fact that you can find the right people, right? And it isn't easy by any means, but it is a thing that you can do. It is an option. It is a choice. Remember, everything is a choice. And so you can choose that. And the biggest thing is being intentional about your kids' education. Don't just send them to the local public school. Probably do some research. And I know that finances can be an issue when it comes to public school. That's why it's a lot of people just do that, because it's free. Well, everything has a cost, but it is quote unquote free. Now, in reality, it is best to explore alternate options and vet the places you are sending your children more than anything.
Most definitely. And unfortunately, even beyond the quality of education, abuse is a very widespread issue. And particularly post-pandemic, so many educational systems are so desperate for teachers that they're not even doing appropriate background checks. I have run into many teachers that frankly have no business being around children. And even if it's for a reason as innocuous as they clearly don't like kids, that's going to leave a terrible impression on a 4 or 5-year-old that's going to affect their view of education and learning for the rest of their lives. And of course, a lot of the situations are not that innocuous. And we also don't have a system to handle abuse that happens in school. I've seen some terrible things happen to children, and mostly it just falls through the cracks, and it becomes something that they have to deal with later on in their adult lives, because either the parents aren't invested enough to notice, or even if they do know and have some awareness of the situation, they don't know how to handle it, and there's no one at school who's going to handle it.
Yeah, and I think the other issue is that we are devaluing a guardian. In the fact that there are a lot of things coming through in all sorts of directions on all sorts of different issues, where we are taking the guardian out of the equation, going around. And I think that if other people are able to choose for a child without their parent or their guardian's consent, that is wrong. Especially when I find it interesting with a lot of these issues that you can't get a tattoo if you're under 18 without guardian consent. But there are a hell of a lot of other damaging things you can do. And it's like, if anything, and obviously sometimes the parent isn't equipped, but we have systems for that. Now, these systems are broken in many ways, but we do have systems for when a parent isn't fulfilling their role and isn't the right person to make decisions for the child. But it shouldn't be an easy process to go around that guardian, because why should it be? Because that guardian, that's what their job is, to guard the child against things that the guardian believes to be wrong. And it is, until the child is 18, at the end of the day, it is the guardian's job to make some choices for the child. Obviously, you should give your children responsibility and let them make some of their own decisions. But it is your job to make decisions for them in many ways.
Yes, absolutely. I have to completely agree.
Yeah, and so as we kind of wrap it up here, I have a question that I like to ask every guest, and it's a very simple question. It is, what, to the person listening, what is the one thing, or, not necessarily the one thing, what is the thing they should take with them going forward into the rest of their lives?
What a wonderful question. 2 things come immediately to mind. One of the best pieces of advice I've ever received is, and by the way, when I got this piece of advice, I was very much an overthinker and overachiever, so I was overcomplicating something. And a dear friend who is very wise said to me, look, if it feels right in your gut, it's for you. If not, keep walking. And though that sounds simple, it is the most profound and truest piece of advice I've ever gotten, especially in a day and age where we are taught to devalue that voice, our own intuition. So that is the first thing. And the second thing is, I did mention earlier, but I think it bears repeating, we all need to to really embrace and accept the idea that we are at least 50% responsible for everything we ever experience. That means what happens to us, the people we meet, the places we end up, these seemingly coincidental occurrences. We are designing everything, and again, not on a conscious level necessarily, but on a subconscious level, we are designing our own lives. We are each emitting a frequency that is drawing the experiences that we need or want toward us. So if you're having an experience of life that you don't want, that you don't like, that is not for you, maybe it's painful, maybe it's simply a bad job situation, maybe you're in a relationship that is not for you. It is imperative to realize that you have the power to change it. And again, that sounds like an oversimplification, but it's really not. Back to your early point about focus and choice. If you focus on what is actually right for you, on what your soul is actually telling you, it becomes very easy to create the life that is going to feed you and not only be in your own highest, greatest good, but for that of everybody around you.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And I just want to thank you for coming on here. This was fun. I know we had technical difficulties, but we made it through.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It was really a pleasure.
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys at home for watching. I'm Parker Emerald. I've been talking to Brianna Ladapo, and this has been The Conversation Station.